Welcome back. We are on another episode. It feels like episode 2314. It is not, I believe it is episode 7, and I'm here with my dear friend, Pastor Matthew P. Short. I don't know if P is correct, but we're gonna go with it. I asked Will, what is your middle name?
Allen.
Allen. All right. So Matthew Allen Short. Is it Allan or Ian?
Ian.
Ian. Wow.
It is the same middle name that my father has, and we gave the same middle name to my son. So we are Mark Allen Short, Matthew Allen Short, Lucas Allen Short. And so we've joked with Lucas, if he has a son, he's not contractually obligated to name him John, but he could.
Yeah, that's right. You got to do it somehow. I don't want to say he'll be a disappointment.
Right.
So we're going to kick off. Matt, you're going to be on what I lovingly refer to as ex cathedra. So you're going to be on the throne, on the hot seat. You're going to be answering 6 questions. They are all kinds of hot button issues. I'm really going to test your faith, your morality, your memory, all kinds of things. There might even be a color blindness test at some point.
That's okay. Our friendship has tested my morality before.
That is 1000% correct. All right. So for anybody watching, if you stay tuned all the way to the end of the video, you're going to have a special surprise. Matt has a pet sloth, and he's going to show off the pet sloth. And it does this weird trick, which I do not condone animal smoking, but Matt says it's not that big of a deal. So if you are ready, we will jump on that ex cathedra with question number 1. For people that are coming from my audience, if they end up watching from your audience, your friends on Facebook, they already know this. My people don't. Matt is not just a pastor. He has been elevated through like a tractor beam type contraption, and he is an assistant to a bishop. Okay, so he is on the synodical level. So question number 1, what is it like working for the man of the church? And I don't know if your bishop is male or female, but in the collective cultural sense, what's it like working for the man?
Well, I could tell you all sorts of funny things about, in all honesty, here's the summary. It is really, I still very much function like a pastor. I often remind myself that my congregation is now my colleagues rather than a congregation of lay leaders. So really, I do still function like a pastor in a lot of ways. Stepping into the bishop's office is a little bit like a demotion because really parish ministry, I believe, is where it's at. And so my role is to offer support, resourcing, and a pastoral presence at times to empower congregational ministry, because that is where God shows up in the gathered and sent people that come together in congregations across the United States, across the world. One of my colleagues once used the analogy of a pyramid, like so sometimes we picture the pyramid like this with the bishop at the tip. He says it's actually the exact opposite. Like, so if you think of like presiding Bishop Eaton is the point of the pyramid if it's upside down. And so she is then supporting 65 synod bishops. Those synod bishops call staff like me. We are supporting in my synod 118 congregations, a campus ministry, 3 new starts.
Okay.
And so then it all filters up to the top, which is the broad base of congregational ministry, and that's what matters. And ultimately, to make sure that the people who are seeking the presence of God in their daily lives and seeking to figure out how to share that presence of God in their daily lives can gather together with other Christians. And in the end, that's the point, right? Not the buildings, not the institutional structure. One of the things that keeps me rock solid all the time, this feels like a foundation underneath everything for me, and this is like the secure foundation on which I can stand, is that, for more than 2,000 years, the Word of God has operated through Christianity, right? And the truth that we proclaim of the risen Christ, that has survived the rise and fall of empires. It's survived the Black Plague. It's, churches come and go. They open and close. Denominations come and go. But the church, big C, like the Jesus people, we ain't going anywhere. And so that's really the confidence that gives me the ability to walk through what is often a lot of institutional craziness. All of it serves our ability to proclaim Christ crucified and risen. Here's the craziest part about working in a synod office, to be completely honest. We all know that triangulation can often become unhealthy. in communication, right? So, like, if I have an issue with you, Jeff, I shouldn't go call up Will and be like, you know what? Jeff drives me nuts. I should come to you.
Right.
Well, the synod office is always the third point in a triangle. So, triangulated conversations aren't by default unhealthy, but they can get there very quickly. So you have to constantly guard against that. I have learned the power of carbon copying emails, like always trying to, if a member reaches out to us mad at the pastor, we've got to make sure that everybody's in that conversation and that we're empowering people to speak directly to each other. I'll share one last thing because our bishop said this publicly a couple of years ago, and I thought it was just brilliant. Often people treat the synod office like we are either the fire department or the police department. Yep. You either want us to put out fires or you want us to enforce the rules. But increasingly, I hope you see us as partners in ministry.
Question number 2, your sense of call to ministry, to being a pastor. Was it something that was an immediate experience, an aha moment, or was it something that was a gradual acceptance over a period of time?
The answer is yes.
There you go.
Great. So because I experienced it both ways. So really the gradual thing over time came from, in all honesty, the way God used the church in my early life. Okay. So, one thing that because we're friends, but most people listening wouldn't, is that on paper, there are some details of my childhood that don't look great. Now, I always have to start this by saying I always had loving adults in my life. But those loving adults in my life went through many different family configurations over and over and over. Lots of different marriages and divorces. So on paper, you could look at my upbringing and say, oh, goodness, this person's probably going to be a sociopath. It was always important for me to tell this story, even as all the family configurations rolled on and they were always different and there were all these marriages and divorces. Going through seminary, I had to tell that story a lot of all the various family configurations I was growing up with. But the thing that was constant was the presence of the church and the people in it. And for a lot of years, I told the story using that language. The church was a constant in my life. And now I've really tried to train myself to speak more proactively about God's activity in the world and in my life, instead of always making it about the church, because we're not just a secular 501c3, right? Like, we actually believe that the word of God is living and active, that God shows up in our daily lives. And so I have some really powerful experiences from my childhood, including when I was 14. One of the news of one of the impending divorces was delivered to me by the adults in my life. And I hit this deep sense of despair. And the despair was driven by the thought that this was going to be the character of my life, that for the rest of my life, nothing would ever be stable. Relationships would always just be in flux, and I would never just be able to settle in and get to know people and have a family configuration stay the same. So at 14 years old, that's the thought that drove this deep sense of despair, is like, this is going to be the pattern of my whole life. And in the middle of that deep sense of despair, I was sitting at my desk in my room, and my pastor had given me this little laminated bookmark. I'm sure he got it from some Christian publishing company that was trying to sell him stuff. Right. But he had given me this little laminated bookmark that had Psalm 121 on it. And so in the midst of that deep despair, I'm sitting at my desk in tears, 14 years old, and I look at that little card. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And still I have a hard time making it through reading or reciting that psalm without getting teary. And honestly, the sense that I had in that moment was, no matter what chaos I walk through, God's got this and God's got me. That was my way of articulating it when I was 14, but it's still pretty similar now. That feels like this rock solid foundation. That's part of what gives me the confidence to walk through all the insanity that we're dealing with in institutional change in the church right now, is still that rock solid foundation of, no matter what changes, the sun will rise tomorrow. Christ's love ultimately is victorious, period. And then I went to a national youth gathering, 94, goodness, dating ourselves, right? In 94, I went to the youth gathering as a freshman in high school. All of this stuff swirling in my head. The experience I just told you about had been like a year earlier, and Tony Campolo spoke at that. And I remember thinking, he did the whole Elijah story. And we sang, "Here I Am, Lord." And in that moment, standing in this massive, football stadium with all these other people, I thought, I wonder if all of this pain and instability and the way I've experienced God's love through it might be something that it's twisted into a blessing that I could use in ministry.
All right, number 3. I have kids. You have kids. They're not the same kids, but we have kids. What do you hope your kids get and think about? So like when they reflect on their lives as they're continuing getting older and starting their own families, about their time being a PK, being a pastor's kid, what do you hope they take from, because we make a ton of mistakes. Church life is not always easy for pastors, and you and Jess, Matt's wife, is a pastor. What is your hope that your kids can look back at their childhoods and go, this was something that was really good about being a PK?
I mean, honestly, it directly connects to that last thing I said. And our son actually just said this the other day. My wife is currently on leave from call, and so she's transitioning to a different call. And there's the possibility that for a very short time, she may be able to help out at a place where our kids are involved.
Okay.
And so we had to have this conversation as a family about like, or would you guys be okay with the fact that
Right.
mom might for a very short time kind of be your youth leader? And my son's comment was so beautiful. He said, well, dad was our pastor for many years. And he said, I love it when family life and church life overlap, because then we've got all these people, we've got all these extra grandparents. My previous call, they just loved on my kids. I mean, they just had a bunch of extra grandparents. Quite literally, there was a time where their own grandparents couldn't come to Grandparents' Day at the school. And so then one of the older members of my previous church, with whom we had a really close relationship, came as a surrogate grandparent to Grandparents' Day at the elementary school. I hope that our kids remember, essentially, that for all of the challenges and the very genuine critiques of organized religion, most of which I absolutely agree with, for all of those truths, God really can use people in groups for incredible good. It may have been Abraham Joshua Heschel. He said, here's the quote, religion is fire. And like fire, it can be used to warm or it can be used to burn. But fire is not going away. And so that actually comes back to my sense of call. And that is, I guess I decided at a certain point that I had more power inside the tent than outside the tent to make sure that this power of God using people in groups,
Right.
Or of people in groups, the power of people in groups could be used to warm and not to burn.
So speaking of story, segue, didn't even plan that. Question number 4, do you have, and maybe it's Psalm 21, do you have a favorite Bible story or Bible passage that this is a story that I just hits me, just resonates?
Yeah, I mean, there are really 2 personally. It is Psalm 121. And what I love about that is growing up in Arizona, looking up at magnificent mountains. I mean, there are gorgeous mountains right outside my hometown. And so I can hear, and I think about the topography of the geographic area, where some of these passages first emerged. They were looking at more than just hills, quite likely. And so I think of someone just awed by the grandiosity of these beautiful mountains saying, who's here to help me? The same one who made that. The other one is Revelation 22, this image of the river that flows from the throne of God, with the tree on either side of the river producing its fruit each month. And then this beautiful line that says, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. That passage and visual image, became so central during my sabbatical in the summer of 2016 that I got it tattooed on my arm. It is basically a massive image of 2 trees, and it's hard to see, with a river going between them. And the idea that no matter how hard the winds blow, if I am rooted by that river of grace, and it's not a river of grace that I produce, this was a big thing. The perfectionist inside of me was way too focused on, is this good enough? And so that passage became really central for me on my sabbatical, as I realized that river is flowing from the throne of God, not from me. It is a source of grace that I don't produce. And so if I'm like one of those trees that is rooted by the river, then no matter how hard the winds blow, I'm going to be all right, because I'm rooted by a source of grace I don't have to produce. And then that line, the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. So only if I'm rooted by that river can the things I produce be for the healing of others.
So fantastic. You are more than halfway. Question number 5. One of your calls, I don't know if it was your first call, but one of your calls included you working like in an ecumenical ministry, I believe. How important, I mean, you're working with the Synod office, which is denominational, obviously. How important do you believe it is for our church now to embrace and not fight the idea that, well, I'm from here, you're from there, but to embrace this, we all bring different gifts to God's kingdom, and how can we work together to accomplish more?
Vitally important.
Vitally important.
Next question.
Next question.
No, I think it's I mean, it really is vital. I mean, you think about how important the people who were in the American Lutheran Church, the Lutheran Church in America, and the United Evangelical Lutheran Church thought the differences were initially, right? Or the
Right.
Swedes and the Norwegians and the, whatever, all the different groups, they thought those differences were really important. I think the invitation in ecumenical work is really to hone in on what's essential. What is the thing we're bringing to the buffet?
Right.
Like, what's the best stuff we have to offer?
Right.
And in the Lutheran tradition, we have some really rich stuff because we were one of the original breakaways, right? So like, we have some incredibly rich things from Luther about two kingdoms and law and gospel, the dialectic of law and gospel, the dialectic of saint and sinner, and the fact that these are dialectics that you don't have to choose between, but that it's a spectrum to live on, right? Both and. That, I think, is some of the key stuff that we bring to the ecumenical potluck. And what it does is it forces us to identify the stuff that's essential and the stuff that is adiaphora, right? To use a nerdy word. What's the stuff that is secondary? It's not that it's unimportant, but it's secondary.
Okay, last question. And it's not my favorite question, even though it kind of is, but I can't say that's my favorite question. So this is a little bit of background for people. And this is gonna, if there was a wound, if it was open, and I'm gonna pour some salt and I'm gonna poke it, and Matt has no idea. And so the longer I talk about it, the more suspense I build. Is when we were in seminary, someone stole Matt's car. This car that Matt loved. What kind of car was it?
It was a 1982 Pontiac Grand Prix. It was my first car when I was 16.
Someone stole this car. Matt, if the person, you never found out who, you found the car, like the cops found the car.
Yeah, stripped, sitting on the brakes. They had stolen the transmission and the wheels. Yeah, it got to go to a junkyard after that.
If the person or persons who stole your 1982 Pontiac Grand Prix somehow came across this Facebook video, what message of either vengeance, wrath, or forgiveness would you offer to them?
Wait, do I have to choose between vengeance, wrath, and forgiveness? Can I
your
offer a little bit of vengeance?
You can go all three. You can bring up something that stuff I haven't even thought of yet. What would you say to the person having 21 years of life experience after it? What would you say?
I mean, the life experience I've gained afterwards, and I think I even knew this a little bit then, poverty, lack of resources, and desperation drive all sorts of things. I'm assuming that the people who stole that car were facing probably all three of those. And so it's nothing but forgiveness. And so I can truly say it would be nothing but forgiveness if they reached out to me right now and said, we're the ones who stole that. I mean, that's all the really heady, beautiful reasons why I would forgive them. But the other one is a 1982 Pontiac Grand is a rear wheel drive vehicle. Twice I spun that thing on the freeway in snow, and I live in a snowy climate. They did me a favor.
Yeah, they saved your life.
Yeah. No, I mean, I miss that car, but we've goodness. I just hope they have found more hope in their life, because a 1982 Pontiac Grand didn't fix anything for them.
It's not filling a hole. That is not where you will find satisfaction. Yeah, that was a very insightful answer, and I appreciate it. As we wrap this up, I want to say a big thank you to Sir Matthew Allen Short, the Right Reverend Assistant to the Bishop, DEM, Greater Milwaukee Synod, and for your time today, for your ministry, not just with the Greater Milwaukee Synod, but being a part of the Synod, the work you do that crosses the synods and that goes throughout the country, and the work you've done with your congregations, for Jess, for putting up with you, for your kids who will definitely be better people than you are.
Indeed.
So in spite of you. No, just kidding.
That's the hope. No, that's the hope.
Matt's one of the, and you could tell through the interview, I'm going to cut out a lot of it that made him sound too smart. But you could tell, Matt's level of intellect and your passion for ministry, how much the gospel message and God's foundation in your life means to you, and that you've been able to pass that on. So I wish you no more bad things in life. However, if they do happen to you, I trust that God will make something great out of them through you. So I'm very thankful for that. So thank you for your time. Bless you. It'll be the right direction. And God love you, man.
Yeah, you too, Jeff. It's been a gift chatting.